Hi, everybody, and welcome to computer class in 2021. Hope everybody had a great break, and we are back for another Wednesday virtual computer class where today we are going to start talking about a website called Scratch. That's the website's name, however, its address is a little bit different, and the very first thing we're going to do is see how to get to the website Scratch. If you have had me in the past and we've used this, you should be familiar with it, but I'll mention a couple different ways. First, if you went and typed in an address and you just type in the word Scratch, it is not going to get you to the right website. What you need to do is type in scratch.mit.edu. And when you do that, it will get you to this website right here, Scratch. Now, the other way to get there is you could just type in Scratch without any edu or .com or anything and do a Google search, and it should bring that website up in the search results. Or we could go through Portal, where at the school's homepage, you go down to Portal, as we've done many, many times. And in this center box at the top for computers and technology, down because it begins with an S, and these are in alphabetical order, there is a link to the website Scratch. And that brings us to the same place. So this is the website that we're going to use. For everybody that's in 5th through 8th grade, we probably have seen this website before if you've had me, and I'm not going to go into every little detail. For those who are in 3rd and 4th grade, I will just talk a little bit more about the different sections of the site and different things you can do and different things you can see. Now, before we get to that, I want to talk to everybody about signing in. And signing in with Scratch is pretty simple with a couple of little exceptions. So there's a sign in button right here, and it has a spot for a username and password. Now, just taking a look at how we log in. For everyone, I'm going to say it first, it's your same sign in as Google, except you don't type in the at weymouthtsd.org, right? So we'll see that in a second, but your password is also the exact same one as Google. So those are the first two things to know. If you look at a sample here, right? Let's say we have Gregory Jones in 5th grade. So he's the class of 2024, lunch pins 1, 2, 3, 4 as a sample. That person to sign into Scratch would type in 24, Gregory J, and then the password capital J, lowercase o, capital G, lowercase r, 1, 2, 3, 4. So pretty simple. The one thing that happens with Scratch is because I try to base it on your same logins as Google, there are some cases where it comes up where someone with that username is already registered in Scratch and I can't use it. In that case, for those people, and it's only a few of them, I add another letter to your last name and your next letter of your last name. And in one case, I even had to go one step further. But let's take a look and see what I mean. And I want these people to take a note right here, and you can always go back in the video and go here. In 3rd grade, Morgan, you're going to need to type in 26 Morgan LE. 5th grade, Jacob Specht has to type in 24 Jacob SPE, and so on after that. So 24 Isabella, 23 Aubrey, 23 Isabella, 22 Isabella, seems like an Isabella thing, 22 Emma, which I know Emma should remember from last year, 21 Michael. Now, take a look, because for those people, if you email me and say, wait a minute, typing it in, like for Michael right here, if he types in 21 Michael B and he says it doesn't work, you have to pay attention to this if you are one of the, what is this, 6, 7, 8 people on this list. All right, so make sure for those people you type it in that way and remember it, as we're going to be using Scratch for the next couple of weeks. So once you have gotten back to the page and you remember the login pattern, which should be pretty easy because you guys have been signing in with Google a ton, you sign into Scratch. And from there, that's where this video is going to split and have different sections for different classes and what we're going to be doing. All right, so now this next section of the video is specific to 5th through 8th grade. And I'm going to be doing a little bit of extra talking today, explaining a couple things to do with the project that we're going to be trying to work on for the next couple of weeks. We are going to be working in the website Scratch. And here's just a couple of notes that are really, really important. First, I've used Scratch with students in Weymouth Township School from 5th through 8th grade for a couple of years now, and it usually goes pretty well. the level or how complicated the different projects we do has been each year, we're going to try to go a little simpler this year for the main reason that when you guys are in class, physically in class with me, and I'm there to, go up to somebody's computer, help right away, make sure everybody's doing the exact same thing, really go into a lot of explanation about stuff. We're able to do things that are a little bit more complex. So instead of something that's more complex this year, we're going to try to do two projects that I have in mind that are each a little simpler, but can still make something pretty cool, pretty fun, and show you kind of what Scratch is capable of. Um, we're going to start our first project today. I don't think it will take more than 2 weeks, maybe three at the very most, but it's going to be kind of a game. And then the second project is going to be something else, right? Something totally different. Now, I'm sure you've noticed, and you guys know this by now, that for our virtual learning, right? Everything since COVID has happened, and this year how we are having all computer classes virtual. I think I've explained the basics before of when I was thinking about class, thinking about how it would work, thinking about how I needed to make it go. The idea of doing Google Meets for computer class was not really the best idea for a couple different reasons. But one, because I need to be doing and showing things on a computer, right? Rather than like looking into a camera and seeing you guys in a Google Meet. And for you guys, rather than you looking and seeing me in a Google Meet, you need to see my screen and you need to be working on your computers. So having live classes in Google Meet was not the best format. When it comes to a couple different things, but we'll say Scratch right now and what we're going to be doing, um, it gets a little bit tricky because Scratch is a lot of very, very particular or tedious details. It doesn't mean it's necessarily hard or that this is going to be, impossible or too hard for anyone, but you really need to pay close attention to details. So here's just a couple of notes about that before we get started. Number one, um, please remember everything I said from the beginning of the year about pausing your video. Um, Having the videos possibly split so that your screen is split and you're watching on one side while you're doing on the other. If you just sit and go a couple of different scenarios that I know people do, if you're one of the people that just watches the whole video and then goes and tries to do it all, it's going to be confusing. It's going to have you possibly miss steps or forget steps or details of those steps. And if you're one of those people that often doesn't watch the videos, where you look at what we're doing, you mostly try to do it on your own without watching the videos, that would be really, really challenging too. So, my first point, and I've said this before, is split your screen, have Scratch in one side, the video in the other, and pause the video every once in a while. Listen, do a couple steps, or listen to a couple steps rather, then do them. Listen to a couple steps, then do them. Um, that would probably be best. Now, for people who need extra help or have a problem or are confused or something like that, I am available for help. I try to answer messages and emails as fast as possible. You guys know about Go Guardian, and if somebody is really struggling, having a hard time, lost, what you could do is message me, and I can look at your screen in Go Guardian and see what's happening, and possibly try to help you in that way. If we go to do this, and this is the first time that I'm ever teaching Scratch virtually with a class, if we really have a hard time, or a lot of people are struggling or missing things, or whatever the case may be, I'm not against having a Google Meet if it becomes necessary that we need to do it that way, and I'd be really happy to see you guys, but if you just really think it through, Google Meet would be very difficult for computer class, because if we're going to Google Meet, you need to be doing things on your screen, and then having things happen that I can't necessarily see at the same time, and it would just get a little bit tedious. But if that happens and we need to switch it up a little bit, and next week or a week after have a Google Meet to make it successful, we'll figure it out, and we'll do whatever we need to. Now, for fifth through eighth grade, I'm not going to go through a lot of detail about Scratch itself. We should know that this is a website. It was developed by people at MIT, and it's to really give kids or anyone a creative way to make projects using block coding. When you did things in the past in code.org or other websites, a lot of those were really based on Scratch, where the people who developed those, they used the Scratch block coding language to make the things that you saw in code.org and make the lessons and make the different tasks and puzzles and interactive things you can do. But Scratch itself has really a blank canvas or a blank space for you to make just about anything that you can imagine. Now, this logo right here at the top, that will always bring you back to the Scratch main page. You should see that you're signed in. This folder right here is where all of your projects will lie. Um, and there are a couple of other sections and things you can do and things you can find. You can explore projects that other people made and a couple of other things, but I'm only going to highlight the main things we're going to be doing. So for today, we're going to go to Create, and that's going to give us a blank Scratch canvas. Now, what we're going to be making is kind of it's a game where you have to dodge balls that are dropping. And I'll say more detail about that later. And you get a score for being able to do so, and how many you can dodge and how many you can get past. It's a really just like a simple little flash or arcade game that we can make successfully and can be a little bit of fun. Now, um, the sections of Scratch you should know pretty well, but for people who may be newer, if we start on the left over here, right, we have tabs between code, costumes, and sounds. And for each object or specific that I'll mention in a minute, you can go between those tabs to customize each of those different things. On the code tab, you have all of your different blocks here that are separated into different colors and categories based on what type of blocks they are and what they do. This big blank area right here is your main section for creating code or the program or commands that your Scratch program will follow. Over here on the bottom right, it's going to give you information about your sprites. Sprites are the name that Scratch has come up with for like your objects. That can be anything from a character to an enemy to something they interact with. And it always starts, just as a little default, with having that Scratch cat that's Scratch's mascot as a default sprite, which usually the first thing we do is get rid of it, and we're going to do that same thing today. Over in the sprite section, you also have one section here for your stage or backdrop, and that's the background that you see. And then last but not least, you have this square right here, which shows your actual program and when it's run, what it will do, and what's happening with that program. So those are the main sections. Similar to Google, it has a name up here. And the first thing that we can do is we can name this. So let's name this Dodgeball. Now, I'm going to mention this right now. It's going to come up a lot. When we do the Scratch projects that I have in mind, there are lots of times you can customize them. There are lots of times where I'll say, okay, you know what? If you want to choose something different, if you want to make your own choice, you want to customize, here's a spot you can do that. If you didn't want to name it Dodgeball, I gave you kind of a description of how it works. You're a character, you're trying to dodge these falling objects. If you want to name it something else, or if you just put in a name for now and then go and change it later, that's perfectly fine. You can do that. Now, one of the first things we're going to do is we're going to make a splash screen. And if you think about games you play on a phone, play on an Xbox, play in an arcade, play anywhere, they often start with a little splash screen that goes and kind of starts everything, introduces it, almost like a title page or a cover, and then the game actually starts. And I like to make those two. They're really simple to make in Scratch. So the way that we do that is going to be with this backdrop over here in the stage section. And what we're going to do first in that is go and add in a backdrop that we paint. So if you see what I'm clicking on, see in the sprite section and in the backdrop section, there's this little circle with a plus sign. And there's a couple different ways to add in a backdrop. It could be from the Scratch library. You can paint one. You can do it a couple of different ways. But we're going to go to this paintbrush tool to add in our splash screen backdrop. All right, so to do that, it's going to be extremely simple. You could potentially make it more complicated or more interesting, but let's do it this way. To start off, we're going to fill in this area of the backdrop with a color. Now, there's a couple different ways you could do that. one way is to convert it to bitmap. That button's going to be down here on the backdrop page, and if we ever customize sprites, and it just goes between two different picture formats, vector or bitmap. It defaults right now in vector, and that's not the best for doing what we're going to do, so we're going to convert to bitmap. And then we're going to pick our paint bucket or fill tool and pick a color. You can pick whatever color you like. You use these sliders. There's also options for making gradients up here at the top. And I'm really going to go kind of random here because I'm not looking for anything overly complicated. But you have color 1 and color 2 if you have a gradient or just a single color. And right now, you guys can go pick a color scheme. I'll go with something that's a little reddish to a little purplish. And once you have it picked, go ahead and click anywhere in the blank area to fill it in. And you have that as a custom backdrop. Now, I also want to add in a shape where I'm going to say outlined. And for that shape, I just want to make a white border. This is just design choice, really. If you skipped this, if you didn't do it, if you thought of some different ways of decorating this page, you're allowed. It's fine. It's not going to be any problem. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a little border by clicking on this shape tool, outlined. I change my color to white. And then I'm just going to go in one corner. You can start in any one. It doesn't really matter. All right, so once you have those settings selected, and you can change the thickness if you want. You could always undo and redo and go back if you want to adjust it. You just pick a corner. I'm going to pick this top left right here. Come in just a little bit from the corner and click and drag to draw a little border. It's just a design choice I think makes it look a little bit nicer. And now I have a nice layout for my splash screen. What we're going to do now is we're actually going to go ahead and leave that done right there, but duplicate it. So when I go to my backdrops and the section over here that shows the backdrops where there's a white, there is the colorful one that I have. I'm going to right click on it and duplicate it. If you're on a Chromebook, that would be an alt click. And I'm going to select duplicate, so I have two of these. When we go to add in the code, you'll see why. And I'm going to now make my second one have text on it. And I'm going to use the text tool right here. Click somewhere in this box. I can change my font if I want to. I like to use this pixel font because it has kind of an old-fashioned video game look. The fill is your color, and I'm going to leave mine white. If you wanted to change yours to another color, again, that's personal choice. That's perfectly fine. And I'm just going to type in the word dodgeball. If you named yours something else, if you want to type something else in there, that's fine. I'm going to press or click out of it rather, so that it shows the box with the handles around it, and make it a little bit bigger by dragging. There's no point size for the fonts right here. You have to do it by clicking and dragging, and then move it to where I want it, which is in about the top centered section of the screen. And I'm going to add a second text box right here where I'm going to say bye, and then Mr. Henderson. Obviously you would put your own name. And for this, I might change the color around a little bit. Now, a few little details or warnings. You could either change your font before you type anything, or after you type, you can select it. The thing is, you want to make sure before you click out of that box that it is exactly what you want, because after you click once or twice, it may make it so that it's no longer editable anymore. And that may give you a little bit of a problem if you decide that you didn't like it, that it's something that you wanted different. It may mean that you have to delete it, undo, go back. So it's really best to make sure you make any of those changes as you are going, so that right now, see, I kind of did it on purpose. Now that I did something and I don't want it, I have to really undo to go back and change that to make it exactly what I want. So that was just to show you it's best to do all your changes and make everything the way you want it before you click out of that text box and kind of have it finalized. Just use your undo button if you want to go back and change. I'm going to change this to a different font, change it to a different color. adjust my sliders here a little bit. And I'm happy with that. Let me just move it in place, centered in the lower section. And I know I'm done, so I'm going to click out of it. And there I have my splash screen. It consists of that blank colorful box and the one with the text. And we're going to see how we go back and forth between those in a minute. So that is what I need for my splash screen for my backdrop. That's not going to be the backdrop for the game or for the levels. That backdrop we're going to make in a little while, but what that means is that we're left with this white one right here, which we really don't need. So if you want to delete it over in the section with the backdrops here, you could press the trash can button, delete that white one, and now we have the two that we're going to use. Now, we're going to code this backdrop by switching over to the code tab right here, and we're going to start with an event. Right? An event is when something happens. And for this event, it's going to be when the green flag is clicked. The green flag is basically like a start button or a load button, right? And when the green flag is clicked, we want something to happen. And it's going to be all with that backdrop. So with that backdrop, I'm going to go to Control. And I want this to repeat a number of times. It defaults to 10 at the beginning. We're going to adjust that later once we get our timing just right to know how many times we want it to repeat. But when that happens, when the green flag is clicked, I want it to go to my Looks tab, switch to backdrop, and this I want to be my one without the text, so that's my backdrop 2. If you're not sure, click on the backdrops tab and look at what they're named, which you can also adjust if you need to. You could rename them something else if there was a reason to, but this is backdrop 2 with no text. This is backdrop 3. So back to my code. When the green flag is clicked, I have my repeat block, and inside of it, I want to switch to backdrop, and that's the backdrop with no text. Then go back to Control. I'm going to wait, and then go back to Looks, switch to Backdrop, and this will be my Backdrop 3, the one with the text, and then back to Control for one more wait. All right, now that would be the main thing that I want to happen as far as the looks of this. And what it'll cause if we just ran our program right now is it flash back and forth between the one with text and one without text. Make it look like that text is flashing on the screen. I know the cat's in the way. Don't worry, we're going to get to that next. But I now have flashing text. Here's a couple of things, though. Number one, I may not want it to repeat 10 times. We're going to find that out in just a little bit. Also, I may want these seconds to change because 1 second, even though 1 second is a short amount of time, it made it flash pretty slow. I want it to go just a tiny bit faster. See that on, off, on, off. I want it to go just a little bit faster. So to have it go faster, I want to decrease the time. Let's see what happens if I change that to 0.5. That's a half of a second. And then again on this one, 0.5, a half of a second. And now let's give it another try, and we see that flashes a little faster, and I like that better. If you want to experiment, I wouldn't go higher than 1 second. I wouldn't go to 2 seconds, 3 seconds, 4 seconds. But if you want to do a 0.4, a 0.3, a 0.6, and see what you like the best, that's perfectly fine. Now, we're going to add another when the green flag is clicked box. So that's back in events, or block rather. That's back in events, and we're going to add another one to the workspace here, because also when the green flag is clicked, we want to play a sound. So over here in my tabs for the splash screen or the backdrop, I want to go to sound, and then I want to find a sound that I like as like a little introductory music, right? And it gives you a couple of options here. Again, like most of the choices do, where I want to use, you could record something if you wanted, you could upload a sound if you wanted, but I want to choose a sound from the Scratch library. And I want to find something that's a little bit more like a jingle, right? A little bit more like what they call here a loop. I don't want to make it just an animal sound or a single sound like a car engine or a guitar or something. I want to make it, close my email so you don't have to see my email from Burns Buick GMC. But in any case, I want to make it something like, not like just a trombone hit, but a loop where it's like a little jingle. And let's take a look at a few. Not bad. How about, okay, so, oh, I like this one. Or hold on. Actually, I think I like this one the best. Dance Magic. Now, the reason that we left it default to 10 loops or 10 repeats at the beginning is because all of your sounds, whichever one you pick, because this is custom, whichever one you pick, it might be a different length. It's showing me here that this is 8.53 seconds. Yours might be 6 seconds, might be 10 seconds, might be 7.2 seconds. So everybody's going to be a little bit different, and that is going to affect what we do for our code tab of how many times this repeats. So, under when the green flag is clicked, we're going to go to sound now, and we're going to do play sound, and it should default, if you picked your sound already, to the one that you picked. If you happen to click on a couple of them and add a couple of them to this backdrop, you may need to use this drop down box and pick the one that you want. But now let's see what happens. I'm going to run a test, and I'm going to see how the flashing backdrop matches up to my sound, and if it repeats and goes too long, or if it doesn't go long enough. Let's give it a check. Okay, so it flashed, right, or went back and forth between the costumes for longer than the sound. That means I'm going to have to lower the amount of time that it repeats. If it stopped flashing and the sound was still playing, I would have to increase the amount of time that it repeats. But it was pretty close. So I think I could probably just change mine to 9. If this doesn't work, it'll only be 8. And if I just repeat that 9 times now, it should match up pretty closely. Let's give it a check again. Perfect, right? And I didn't even plan that. It just happened to be that it was the perfect amount of time that it fits, and I love it. So this backdrop is done. Now I will tell you, because in a couple of our steps we're going to have to go back and kind of add later, that eventually we'll have to add another block here to the very bottom once we have the backdrop for our level. So we're going to go and take a look at something else right now, and then once we decide on the backdrop for our level, we'll go back and we'll add it here so that once that intro splash screen is done playing, it'll automatically go back to the backdrop that we want to be able to play the game. But we're going to end there for now for the backdrop, and let's just do a little bit with our sprite for now. Now, in the sprite section right here, we have the cat. And I'm giving like the 3rd and 4th grade an introduction to Scratch, so we're going to use the cat. But for most things where we make our own projects, this is here, but we don't really want it. So what we could do is we could click on that sprite for the cat and click the trash can to delete it so that that sprite is gone. If you want to, delete it and go back and see how your backdrop looks without the sprite there, that's fine. But now let's add in the sprite that we want. And this button right here with the plus sign will allow us to add in sprites. We're only going to use 2, maybe 3 for this entire project. But we're going to use the Scratch Sprite Library. Again, you have the choice to use that, which is the magnifying glass here. You could make your own sprite by painting it. The surprise button, it just kind of gives you a random one, or you could upload a sprite. But in this case, we're going to choose a sprite from the library. And this is going to be our main character. We want it to be something that's like a person or maybe an animal. I'll show you one that I'm going to use that I think will work well. Thing is, you don't want this to be something like a balloon. Okay, you don't want this to be something like an arrow. And let me give you a couple examples of ones that would work. The ballerina right here. The ballerina would work fine. The bat, not bad. One of the reasons I'm saying a maybe here is that see how the wings come off and they're kind of it makes it so that instead of the body being pretty compact, it has these sections that come off. That's going to affect what we do a little later on. Casey would be again fair. The cat, which I never really used for any projects, but you could use the cat. Centaur, but I want to use something that's like a humanoid or animal figure, and I know which one I want to use. I have to see where it is. Here it is. I don't even know how you would say that, Gija or Giga, but I'm going to use this one. If you would prefer to pick something else, this is where you get a little choice, but, and please hear me here, you might find that your choice doesn't work the best and you need to go adjust it later. And that's perfectly fine if you have to do that. So I added in my sprite Giga or Gija. You know what? I'm going to change the name so I don't have to worry about how to pronounce that the whole time. And I'm just going to call that Player 1. And I did that right here in the sprite name. You could adjust any sprite names, and really, it doesn't matter what you call them. As long as you know what it is, as long as you'll remember, as long as you can tell them apart, you could call it Bob, you could call it Stacy, you could call it whatever you want. Now, it defaults to starting right here in the center of the screen at a certain size. And the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to change that. We're going to change its position, so we drag it so that it's a little lower on the screen. And it will give you the exact coordinates right here in the X coordinate and the Y coordinate of where you moved it to. Notice I didn't make it so that it touches the very bottom edge, because you'll see when we get to making our game, we don't want that. We want it just up slightly so that there's a little space below it right there. The size is not bad, but it's a little too big. Now, every sprite has a different size. If you put in something and it's much bigger, you put in something smaller, this is where you're going to have to use a little judgment. But see where the size is 100%? It's not too far off, but I want to change that slightly. And I want to make mine, let me try 80%. 80%, not bad. I might go just a tiny bit smaller and make it about 75%. Now, where you use your judgment is you look right now at how big my sprite is compared to the rest of my game stage or the rest of this box. That is a good size right there. That's going to work well for our game. If it's too big or if it's too small, it might not work as well. You could always go back and adjust it later, but you want to just use your judgment to make whatever sprite you're using about the same proportions as far as how much space in that box it takes up. All right, now, one of our last steps for today is we are going to get this sprite moving. It's not going to have a ton of movements. It's not going to be able to move everywhere on the page. But we are going to have this sprite move around a little bit left and right. There are different techniques to make sprites move. And when I say move, it's move along with keyboard presses. Some sprites can move on their own. Some sprites can be animated. But we're going to have it move with keyboard presses. And the way we're going to do that is to go to our code, right? So the code tab over here. And we're going to do a event that when the green flag is clicked. All right, this is one technique we're going to use. It's a very, very simple technique. When the green flag is clicked, we need to add in a forever block before we added in a repeat. Basically, if I just started adding blocks under this right now, those things will happen one time when the green flag is clicked or whatever your event is. What I want it to be is that once the green flag is clicked, anytime I press these certain key combinations that I'm going to press. It could be I press them, I stop, I change, I press them again. Anytime that happens, this sprite moves the way I want it to. And watch how easy it is. Go to your control and get the forever block right here. Connect it to your when the green flag is clicked. And now we're going to add in from the same section of control, we're going to add in two if statements. Now, there's two different rather. There's an if then and an if-then else. We just want to add in the if-then once, and then the if-then twice. Pay really close attention to how I arranged that. See how they're both connected within the forever block. If you accidentally put it outside of the forever block, or this if inside of this if you do things like that, you're going to say, wait a minute, this isn't working, this is not doing what it's supposed to, and I'll say, yeah, that's correct, because you added them in a different way, caused it to behave differently. All right, now, we have our when the green flag is clicked, a forever block, and within that forever block, two if-then statements on top of each other connected. And so simply, if you think through this and predict what's going to happen, we're going to say, if the right arrow is pressed, then we're going to add a block that'll change it to move to the right. If the left arrow is pressed, and those are the keys on the keyboard, then we're going to make it move to the left. So let's go and go to sensing. And again, this is one technique for movement. It's not the only one. There's a couple different techniques for movement, but this one's going to work really well for our game. So in our sensing section, see right about in the middle here, it says key, and it defaults to space pressed. I want to drag that over once and put it in this shape right here, this cutout. It's like filling in blocks, and it gives you a clue that this will fit in here. If I went to something else, like an operator, and I tried to drag in an operator and put it in here, see how that's a different shape on the edges? It's not going to let me, right? Oh, and by the way, I should have mentioned this here. If you ever drag in a block and then you decide you don't want it or don't need it, you just drag it back over to the block section and it will disappear. Okay, so some people do get tripped up just a little bit in adding these in correctly. The way that it works is that you want to take it, put it over top of that shape, and see that little highlight that comes up, the little white around the shape? That will tell you that it's going to drop in correctly. If you put it, let me try to do it wrong. If you just put it right like this, see how now you can see a little bit in the background that border around the shape is not turning white? It's not going to add in where I want it to. You want to move your mouse onto that shape, make sure it highlights white around the edge, and then drop it in. Do that once, back to sensing, and do that again for the second one. We use the same block, key, defaults to space, pressed. Now for the top one, change that drop down to right arrow, and for the bottom one, change that drop down to left arrow. Okay, so we told it that forever, the whole time this program is run, if the right arrow key is pressed, then, and if the left arrow key is pressed, then. Now, there are, I already mentioned there's a couple techniques. In the technique that I'm going to use, it's going to make it so that it moves really quickly and smoothly. It responds really well. In some of the other ones, they're better if you don't need it to respond as quickly. Those other techniques can work really well for movement. But here, instead of telling it to move a number of spaces, we're going to tell it to change its X position. The X position is basically where it is horizontally or left and right. And so I'm going to go to my motion section right here. See the move 10 steps? That's what I was mentioning. That's another technique. It's used in other ways. If you wanted to experiment right now and see how it works if you put in the move block, you can do that. However, in my opinion, it's not going to move as smooth or as well in this technique, where we're going to scroll down a little bit and look at change X by, right? I'm going to drag that in and put it inside my first if block, and then drag a second one. Oh, that first one didn't connect the way I wanted to, so we fix that. And then second one of the same thing, and put it in my other if block. Now, if you just went to try to do this right now and said, oh, I'm done, I'm going to press some things, see what happens. Well, you'll press the right arrow, and it will move. And it's doing it correctly. But my left arrow, it's not going to, because I have the same number that is changing X by for both of them. What I need to do is I need to make the second one with the left arrow a negative number. So I'm going to make it negative. And just to start, you can not do this right away, but I'll make it -10 to start. And now when I press my left and right arrows, it moves really well left and right. That's all that's necessary. I've experimented with this a little bit because Scratch, you have to do a lot of experimentation. You have to see if it's doing what you want it to. And I found that actually changing this number to a 5 and a -5 is what gives it a little better motion, right? And so it makes it a little smoother, a little more precise. It's kind of like if you have any game that you play, and I could mention some that I play, where you can adjust your sensitivity for maybe moving around a sight or a scope or something else, and you can adjust your sensitivity. It's kind of like that. 10 would work, but I think 5 is a little better. So we want a 5 and a -5. Now we have this guy moving. For today, and I know this is going on a little while, why don't we just do one last thing? And why don't we make that so that this sprite doesn't appear until the splash screen is finished? And for that, I want a hide and a show block. So in my look section, there is a show and a hide. I'm going to add them in the order I said first, which is hide. And I'm going to put that in between the green flag clicked and the forever block, and then the show right after it. Now, the other thing that I need to do is go to my control, and I need to put a wait in between them. Hide, wait, show. Now, how much time should we have in there? Well, the easiest way to start off and make sure it's at least close and looking good is to go back to our backdrop and remember this sound that I picked that was 8.53 seconds. If I go back now to this sprite and I think of a wait time right here, I'm going to try to put in 8.53 seconds. And that should match up really well. I might need to do a little fine tuning. For yours, you again picked possibly a different sound than I did, so your number might need to be a little bit different. You go back and check. But let's put it all together and check and see how it's looking. Okay, that is absolutely perfect. And I want to keep going and going, but I should stop because I know this video is getting a little bit longer. How about we say that that is good for today? I know we don't have the backdrop for our level, We don't have the other sprite added, but this is going pretty quickly. And next week we will go ahead in and adjust a few things we have, add a few other things, and this is going to make a game that's playable, a game that's fun, really quickly and really easily.